Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kieran Hanrahan. I'm the Field Trips Chair for the Portland chapter of the Native Plant Society of Oregon. NPSO promotes the enjoyment, study, and protection of Oregon's native plants. I'd especially like to welcome any new NPSO members tonight. As part of our mission, we present a speaker each month on timely topics of interest to our members. Our speaker tonight is Kira Taylor with her presentation, Hiking for Flora in the Tillamook State Forest. We'll get to her presentation after a brief introduction. For closed captioning, click the Show Captions button along the bottom of your Zoom window. After Kira's presentation, she will take questions through the chat. When the Q&A is over, those of you who wish to stay on for chapter social time will be able to unmute and turn your cameras on. This is a perfect time for chapter members to introduce themselves and connect with each other. NPSO is a volunteer-powered membership nonprofit organization, and we welcome you to join via the membership page on npsoregon.org. Next, I have a few announcements from our chapter vice president, Willow Elliott. Welcome all 2024 new and renewing Portland chapter members. Your chapter membership benefits include access to many free hikes during Native Plant Appreciation Month this April. Your April issue of the chapter newsletter lists the main events and links to our chapter Google Calendar where you can find more information. As a reminder, the NPSO annual meeting is May 17th through May 19th at the Grand Ronde Spirit Mountain Lodge. Attending the statewide annual meeting is a great way to learn more about NPSO and native plants of different regions of Oregon. There's still space to reserve your spot. Visit npsoregon.org and click on the annual meeting link on the main landing page to register before May. Lodging reservations at Spirit Mountain are available separately and need to be made soon for the reduced group rate. Now I'll introduce tonight's speaker. Kira Taylor is an herbalist, naturalist, and fourth-generation Oregonian living in Atfalati, Kalapuya territory. Born near the banks of the Willamette River and residing in the eastern foothills of the Coast Range, she has been wandering the mountains and meadows of Oregon for the past 3 decades. Though a freelance hairdresser by trade, her true passion lies in the natural world. She recently completed her Oregon Master Naturalist certification and spends much of her time studying botany, bioregionalism, history, animism, and nature connection. She also volunteers for local environmental organizations like Trail Keepers of Oregon, the Salmonberry Trail, and Rewild Portland, where she acts as co-librarian with her husband Sterling. Much of her work revolves around encouraging all kinds of folks from all walks of life to cultivate relationships with the plants, animals, and land where they call home. With that, I'll turn it over to Kira. Welcome, Kira.
Thanks, Karen. All right, let me get my screen shared. Okay, how's that? Can everybody see the slideshow? Is that working? Thumbs up?
Looks
Yes.
good.
Cool. All right, well, welcome to Hiking for Flora in the Tillamook and Clatsop State Forests. Last summer, I gave a similar talk for Oregon Wild, and I think it was Mary from NPSO saw it and asked if I would do a similar thing for you guys. So, 9 months later, here we are. So let's begin. So what I want to talk about tonight is first who I am and why I'm the one here sharing about the forest, what the Tillamook and Clatsop State Forests are, and where can you find these forests. Then I want to move into the actual trails and plants you can see along the trails. A lot of that's going to be kind of just eye candy. So I'll try and get through the initial introduction and history portion fairly quickly so we can just look at a lot of pretty pictures of plants. There's a lot of plants, so some of them I labeled and then I kind of ran out of steam, so apologies if there's anything you want to know that isn't identified. I'll do my best to answer your questions afterwards. I split the trails up into sort of the northern portion and the southern portion, so that way it's kind of easy for you to decide, do I want to go out 26? Do I want to go out Highway 6 to access some of these? After that, I'm going to talk about basically things to know how to get there, what to know once you are there, things about navigating the logging roads, and basic hiking etiquette in the forest. And then I'll move into things that are happening in the Tillamook and how you can get involved. So who am I? I am a Coast Range resident. I moved out here with my family in 2000, and we've been hiking all over the hills, kind of like my introduction said, for 20 plus years now. It's pretty much right out our back door. We live in Bank, so it's one of the closest places for us to recreate, and I've really just fallen in love with the forest over the years, and really am excited to get to share it with other people. I'm a fourth generation Oregonian, and so my family has quite a bit of roots in the area. I grew up listening to my grandma and her sisters tell stories of camping along Wolf Creek along Highway 26 with their mom and their stepdad while their stepdad built part of the highway in the 30s. So that was really cool just listening to them talk about getting water from the creek to wash their clothes and getting crates of vegetables hauled in on trucks for the highway workers. And it kind of inspired me to try and pursue a life where we could live close to nature as well. That's part of the inspiration for me taking the Master Naturalist courses through the OSU extension. That has been really fun and really added to what I've been studying on my own. Really have been focused on studying a lot of bioregional herbalism for the last uh, 10 to 15 years or so. So really these mountains and forests are my focus, and then I've kind of moved out from there. Related to that, I'm the librarian along with my husband for Rewild Portland. We're an environmental and earth skills education nonprofit, and we work on hooking people up with the land and skills to live more in reciprocity with the land and all different forms of life on it. I've also been volunteering since about 2014, 2015 for the Salmonberry Trail. So that is a Rails to Trails project that is coming through on the disused rail line that runs through the Coast Range towards Tillamook. So currently I'm a member of the Flora and Fauna team, and we're trying to, be good neighbors to our more than human neighbors on the trail and pull out invasives where we can, kind of figure out how to work around sensitive native species and replant. We just finished up a bunch of replanting from the track clearing. And then before that, I was a member of the Canyon and River Planning Subcommittee, where we talked about the most sensitive part of the trail where it runs along the Salmonberry River. And there's a lot of really cool plants and animals in that corridor. I also contributed to Sierra Club's rewrite of 50 hikes in the Tillamook, what was Tillamook State Forest, and then we turned it into Tillamook and Clatsop State Forests. It had been out of print for a while. It was published in 2001, and we worked with Hooligan Press at PSU, and took about 2015 to take the year to rehike everything and take out things that were washed out or didn't work anymore, and then add trails that had been built since the publishing of the book. So we test hiked things, and then I was in charge of assembling the plant list for it. So that's what these pictures are right here. This is the first edition, and then this is the one we rewrote. So it's a little bit more pocket-sized. So what is the Tillamook State Forest? Uh, Geologically speaking, the Coast Range was actually a set of islands off the shore of ancient Oregon, and through subduction and accretion over about 30 to 50 million years ago, it was added to the main body of what is Oregon today. Then basalt lava flows came over from eastern Oregon all the way to the ocean and covered huge swaths of land. And you can see those all up and down the rocky bluffs of the coast. And that's part of what's called the Otter Rock Formation. And it also underlies almost all major Coast Range waterfalls. So that creates a basalt ledge, and then that's something that the creeks can't erode through as easily as the soft sedimentary rock of the Coast Range. So then that's where you get your waterfalls. And that, rainy climate and erosion for the last 7,000 years has created these incredibly steep, narrow peaks and gullies of the Coast Range, and the almost temperate rainforest that grows on top of them. So for over 10,000 years, human habitation in the forest has been kind of around the edges. Uh, no one particular tribe called the whole of the forest home, but coastal peoples like the Clatsop and Tillamook kind of accessed the western side, and then on the eastern side, the Kalapuya had like trade trails that went all the way up Gales Creek to the Wilson River corridor. And then the Clatskanie people from the north, um, sort of around where like Vernonia and Mist is today, they had settlements around like the mid Nehalem Valley. And they think they originally came through from Southwest Washington because there's linguistic similarities there, and they all uh, had different roles in stewarding different parts of the forest and kind of helping turn it into the old growth that the pioneers discovered when they got here. So initially, it was contacted via ships and those kind of trade routes before Lewis and Clark ever got here. And then they were the first people to come overland. Um, then it was a while before anyone came here, but just before the big rush of the Oregon Trail, the Methodists came over, and they were some of the first European settlers, permanent settlers in the area on the Clatsop Plains. And about a decade later, settlers from the trail started arriving in Tillamook County. Uh, this is around the time that they started drafting treaties, but most of those sort of just went unratified until the 20th century, and some were never ratified. Some of the native villagers in the area moved to Grand Ronde, but others actually stayed and lived out the rest of their lives there. There's a historic town or a building in Seaside where at the time the oldest native woman lived, and she taught basketry and things like that to local people to sort of make a living. And about, like it says in the 20s, the last smaller group of Tillamook people living along the Miami River were sort of maintaining still a small village at that point. Logging in the area, it has a really long history as far as Euro-Americans go. That's like the main industry in this area, aside from fishing and other coastal industries. So initially in the 1840s, the mills were centered around Astoria, and over the next few decades, development sort of moved south. Uh, there was a lot of new farming activities going on in the Tillamook Plains, and so with that they needed lumber for houses and barns. And so by the end of the 19th century, they started laying railroad track further into the Coast Range so that they could harvest more of that timber. And by 1911, they were developing the line that became the PRNN, which will become the Salmonberry Trail now. And that finally connected with Portland, which was a major improvement, because otherwise, until that point, they had been shipping lumber up the coast and then down the Columbia and then down the Willamette to inland ports. So after a number of decades of intensive harvest, we had a series of really dry summers, and that started a series of 4 fires that were some of the most intense conflagrations that the area has seen. Uh, Much of the state was already cut over by 1933, but the Tillamook was one of the last stands of original forest remaining because of how remote and how rugged the terrain was. It was a lot harder to access, especially with the equipment at the time, and it was, at the time, the 30s, and so with the economy being so depressed, there was not a lot of resources to keep building logging roads and railroads into the Coast Range. So these stands, up to 400 years old, managed to survive until this first really hot summer. So in August of 1933, the first burn was started around Gales Creek Canyon, likely by a logging operation. Uh, but 10 days later, there was another burn started before the first one could even get put out, and that they historically, arson actually lit that one, which they didn't know at the time. Uh, this they fought this really hard, but these fires were so huge and in such large stands of trees that they had to wait until the rains of the fall came to put it out. It was just impossible for the firefighting crews they had at the time to actually manage and contain. Uh, and this sort of started the pattern of every 6 years, they called it the 6-year curse, another fire would happen. And so the second one happened in the summer of 1939. Also, likely a logging operation, probably a stray spark from one of the steam donkeys. It escaped the spark arrestor. Similar story for 1945, although by this time we were participating in World War II, and so a lot of rumors flew around that this fire could have been started by an incendiary balloon sent over by the Japanese. I haven't been able to find confirmation in my historical research whether it was or not. Most of the things I read do just say it was a rumor, so maybe take that with a grain of salt because I'm not sure how much proof we have on that. In the 50s, then we had the fourth and final fire, which was the first, which was actually able to be contained and not put out by rain. So they finally, after a series of 4 of them, had figured out how to have an arsenal of firefighting people and equipment enough to make it effective. So what you're seeing here on the left is some of the original stands before the burn. And then this on the right is a cloud of smoke from the first fire, I believe, in 1933. This is more of the burned over forest. This is an aerial view from a plane. You can see a little bit of the wing here of that first fire in 1933. So I don't know, those of us who remember 2020, it was very similar. The sky was completely blacked out underneath. The light was red. It filled the air for all this little northwest corner nubbin of Oregon. So after these fires, we needed to find a way to rehabilitate the forest. So Governor Douglas McKay signed the Forest Rehabilitation Act, and it put all of that post-war, manpower and initiation into rebuilding the woods. So they started salvage operations, they started road building, they cut a ton of fire breaks all through the forest. It was a huge period of development and industrializing the forest after these fires, which had been mostly in these areas which were sort of strongholds of old growth. So this kind of was the start of changing the face of the forest to more what we know it today. They built a bunch of lookout towers, and that was their main way of spotting fires. spotting them early, radioing, and getting people on it before another burn could break out. And that's actually what helped them contain the 51 burn, is that they had this system in place by that last burn. Then they sent school children, they sent planting crews, they sent volunteers, they sent prison labor, they sent out of work people, all sorts of people came out here to reforest the hills and valleys of the Tillamook and Clatsop. A lot of companies, logging companies that owned land abandoned it because it was no longer worth anything because it had been so thoroughly burned over so many times. They stopped paying their property taxes. They neglected to replant it, and so the land was repossessed through foreclosure by the counties. These sort of rehabilitation and replanting efforts went on for a number of decades until the early 70s, when on July 18th, 1973, Tom McCall, who was governor at the time, held a closing ceremony declaring that the reforestation had officially concluded. And I believe the place he held this was in the Tillamook Forest near the Charles Sprague Memorial Wayside. So you can visit the forest today and kind of stand on the land that that ceremony took place on, which is kind of cool. That's when the Tillamook Burn became the Tillamook and Clatsop State Forest. And last year was the 50th anniversary. There was some programs at the Forest Center sort of celebrating 50 years of the Tillamook Forest. And these are some of the fire protection systems they had, some of the towers that they had on the hilltops, and lots of reseeding was actually done by helicopter, like you see here. They just flew over and spread as much seed as they possibly could, in addition to having plant crews on the ground with Douglas fir seedlings. They also had buses of school children, and a lot of folks, parents and grandparents, remember doing this every summer for a number of years. So that sort of brings us to the state forests of today. In the 80s and 90s, the forest kind of came of age, and there was more pressure to log it now that it had regenerated. And in the late 90s, the ODF proposed this rule of making the entire purpose of the forest timber harvest and timber production, and that really upset a lot of people. Fishermen, hunters, all kinds of recreational users, and environmentalists pushed back on that use. They didn't think it was within the meaning of greatest permanent value. So the final version of the rule included much more protection than initially planned for watersheds, flood control, erosion prevention, fish and wildlife, and also recreational purposes. So that's when we started seeing a lot more development of the trails we're going to talk about. The main focus was and is still timber production. At the time, it left 90% of the forest open to future logging. So this century has kind of been a story of like, what's the balance there? How can we mm, still have the logging that the people in this area rely on for work, while also conserving it and being a good steward of the land, being good neighbors to animals and plants that live there and need it because it's their home. In 2013, there were these areas called high value conservation areas designated, and so those are terrestrial anchors and aquatic anchors for certain specific characteristics of forest that certain like priority listed animals need in their homes. And there's, I think, the Tillamook and Clatsop are home to 3 of those, and they cover a decent portion of land. You know, for some people, they'd always like it to be more, but it's a good start. And so from 2019 to now, the Board of Forestry actually just voted on something, I think in March. It's still not finalized, but we have the habitat conservation plan, and it sort of is a shift in how the forest is managed, and would set aside more stream buffers, more land into habitat protection and conservation. So this is kind of a little general map of where the forests are. You can go out Highway 26, and then the map doesn't show it, but this actually connects all the way to 101. This is Highway 6 right here, and you can go either one of those and help yourself to all of the different things in the forest. I'm going to talk about 26 first. So the first trail you'll probably encounter as you go out past Timber on 26 is the Four County Point Trail. They recently added another portion of that called the Wolf Creek Loop. Four County Point generally goes to the left when you're at the trailhead, and Wolf Creek goes to the right. This is a really nice, serene part of Wolf Creek, and you really, like, other than occasional road noise, you wouldn't know that you're right next to the highway for most of it. It's just absolutely beautiful. There are many, many trilliums right now in bloom, so kind of have the whole life progression here. I've heard different things. I've heard that they get pink as they age, and I've also heard that they turn pink after they're fertilized, which I think is kind of a little more poetic. So I'm partial to that story. But if you guys know for sure, let me know. Also has this guy, which is a little bit unusual to see. This is the Hall's False Rue anemone, and you can find this guy here. You can find it actually at the trails behind the rest stop on 26, the Sunset rest stop, and then it's also at another trail I'm going to talk about in a moment called the Soapstone Trail. But that's pretty fun to see. There's a small cluster of it here, and then the ones at Soapstone are a little bit larger. Some Oregon grape. There's lots of Oregon grape up on the higher parts of this, and they're like in full bloom right now. So if you love those beautiful yellow flowers, it's a great time to get out there. There's a lot of salal, and there's so much pollen in the air right now from the pines and the maples that all the little veins here are just covered in pollen, so you can really see the texture of the leaves well. And the same is true for these guys, the vanilla leaf. The pollen is just like falling all over them and like settling in the veins, which I think is so cool. Some sword ferns. They're just starting to unfurl right now. And there's different little places along the banks where you can set up a little blanket and watch the river. And then the reason this is called Four County Point is that the trail terminates in a place where where all four of the Northwest Oregon counties meet at a corner, which is the only place in Oregon where that happens. So you can stand right here and be in all four counties at once. So some people think that's a cool novelty. Other people are like, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here for the oxalis and the toothwort and stuff. So, there's something for everybody out there. The next one is sort of halfway between here and Astoria. It's out along Highway 202, and this is Fishhawk Falls. It's a small park. I debated about sharing it because it's kind of my special little place, but I trust everyone here will not blow it up too much. So this is, yeah, one of my favorite places in Northwest Oregon. It's really wet. It's got a ton of big spruce. It's got the skunk cabbage. It's got these huge alder, which are just like bright red up top this time of year with their catkins. And, you can see where they meet the water, even their roots are bright red. Just everything about red alders, just so potent and present here. So this is kind of a spring view and a fall view of the river and the falls. And this is, I believe this is Western Sweet Sicily. And there's a bunch of salmonberry all along the river. Sometimes you can get to them before the birds do. Lots of coltsfoot, especially around the foot like the base of the falls. A lot of Solomon's plume or dragon root. It's really beautiful with dappled light. This is about late summer, probably August here. Some water leaf, starflower, I think Schuyler's corydalis. That's the waterfall at high water levels. And then over on the right is maybe some of the lowest levels during late summer. And the cute little monkey flower grows just to like the bottom left of the falls, maybe sort of in this area. You can see that. Um, but yeah, a lot of times at this time of year, the water will be too high and it is actually covering over where these guys grow. So you gotta time your visit accordingly if you want to get close to the waterfall. It can get pretty thunderous. It's a nice panorama of it in low water, late summer. There's lots of huge towering maples in addition to the alder and the spruce. And one of my very favorite Coast Range plants, the Devil's Club. It's so gorgeous right now, like where it's just leafing out and all of its spines can be caught in the sun. And then this is later in the season, once it's fully leafed out and it reaches out over the water, and it's just these huge umbrellas of leaves. It's just a really impressive, stately, intense presence of a plant. I really love it. This is coming back away from the falls. You have one of your big spruces on the right and a big maple on the left, and the creek beyond that. And then the parking areas next to this field where you can also find these really cool orchids. I thought they were rain orchids at first, but I am pretty sure that they're the hood lady's tresses. If you know otherwise, please correct me. I'm not an expert on orchid botany, but they can be found all in this middle part here where there's a bunch of rushes as well. Uh, and there's some blackberries encroaching it, but we try to bring some clippers when we visit and keep them, because this being out of the way, it doesn't get a whole lot of maintenance. So we try and pick up trash and cut back blackberries because we'd like it to stay a meadow where cool things like that can grow and not just blackberries. So the next place in this northern portion is Soapstone Lake. This is another sort of seldom visited place. I have heard recent rumors that there's been a lot of break-ins at the trailhead. There's not a lot of room to park cars and it's pretty remote, so it can be an attractive nuisance for some people. We've seen broken glass there. I've never personally had my things broken into, but we also drive a pretty beat up old car, so maybe it's just not attractive. So fair warning if you go. But it is a really amazing place to see some more old growth. They're just these towering, again, spruce, cedar, Douglas fir trees, underlaid with so much oxalis and salal, these giant skunk cabbage here. There's a boardwalk at the back of the lake where they just are on your left and right, and they're so huge and prehistoric. It's a really cool thing. Probably this time of year, they're just going to be opening their flowers. And so this is a little bit later in the season once the flowers have gone away and the leaves have fully opened up. These are just such cool plants. And I've read that some of them can live up to 1,000 years. So some of these plants might be very, very old. There's also a lot of cascara growing back in here, which is cool because the cascara was really pursued a lot in the early part of the 20th century for laxative purposes, and they didn't know the appropriate way to harvest them, so a lot of them just got stripped and it killed them, whereas if you actually cut them down but leave a taller stump, they'll regenerate from the stump. So it took, about a century for the cascara to recover in the Coast Range. So it's really cool to see some of these older trees uh, coming back and thriving. This guy in the middle, I believe, is a Bocchinia, and they're kind of all around the edge of the lake. And then I think this guy is a burr reed. Want to say smooth stem burr reed. Can't quite remember, but those guys are right in the where the water starts to be more open, but it's still pretty shallow. I want to say that this is bugle here on the left, Lycopus. I didn't vet that one. So again, please correct me if it's not. Here's a nice view of the open water. I think maybe a water hemlock, but it's this kind of long, skinny lake that goes back here, and there's all sorts of logs around the edge, like this one, where the sundew grows. So there are coniferous plants here, and they kind of come out like midsummer or later. And so if maybe bring some binoculars so you can spot them from the shore, but they're such cool plants and they have to be on, I think it's sphagnum moss. And yeah, so they've been growing all around where the old logs are still kind of hanging out. And when the water lowers in the summer, then they come out, but it might be a little too high water for you to see them this time of the year. Those guys are really, in my opinion, the star of the show at Soapstone. Then there's a bunch of other plants here, just, it depends on what time of year you visit. This is, I think, a male fern. There's hedge nettle, self-heal, the larkspur. Like I was saying, the false rue anemone also grows here. It's just this beautiful, lush place, and uh, it's really cool. You used to be able to camp there, but they took the camping spaces out, so now it's just a day trip thing. But it's really worth it. It's worth kind of taking the trek out to Highway 53 and then trying to find this turnoff. It can be a little bit um, mysterious, but it's not too bad. So then we're going to shift gears and go down to the Highway 6 corridor along the Gales Creek, Wilson River area. In the first place I want to talk about is the Gales Creek Trail. This place, you can access it a couple different places. So you can access it from the Gales Creek campground. You can also access it from the what's called the Summit Trailhead. If you want to start at the bottom and walk up, you can, or you can start at the top and walk down, and you can do shuttle or back and forth. And it also connects with a couple other trails in the area if you want to do longer hikes. So it actually hooks up with the Story Burn Trail, which I'll talk about in a minute. And it also hooks up with, there's another little loop trail around the creek at the campground. And again, just tons of ferns, tons of foliage, pine maple, big leaf maple, cedar. You're just surrounded in green when you're on this trail, and it's really beautiful when the sun is shining through all of the leaves and everything is sort of backlit and new spring green this time of year. And so you're kind of above the creek for a lot of the hike. It's sort of down a steep slope with all of these ferns. Uh, and some of the plants you can see along the way, or there's some bald hip rose. There's some more Oregon grape. There's actually a ton of salal and Oregon grape along a part of this trail, and so you can just like go along at the right time of the year and eat a bunch of berries and just, pretend you're a bear. It's a lot of fun. And yeah, huge Devil's Club here too. It's really cool. It comes out low like this, but then it also comes out over the trail and kind of towers over your head. So that's another one of those nice friends to have when it starts raining in the Coast Range. You can huddle under a Devil's Club to stay dry for a while. This is the upper end at the summit trailhead. And so you're slowly moving away from the creek as you gain in elevation. Uh, Another thing, probably the next closest thing on Highway 6 is University Falls. This is another fairly short trail, and it has a couple other trails that it hooks up with too if you want to make it longer. It's kind of recently clear-cutted, so the first initial portion of the trail is really open along your right side as you come down, and then you sort of get into this bowl where the falls is. And this is at low water, I think probably late July, I want to say, maybe early to mid-August. And when you get to the sign, there's a tiny little arrow someone drew, helpfully pointing you to where the actual trail is, because if you go the intuitive way, you'll just dead end at the side of the creek and not find the waterfall at all. So beautiful view, but not the waterfall you're looking for. There's lots of, bracken fern, lady fern. I think this is Vancouveria, inside out flower. Um, and the logs along the bottom of the falls have a whole bunch of this enchanter's nightshade, as well as some monkey flower and some fringe cup, piggyback plant, uh, more lady's fern. There's just tons of different little forest ephemerals hanging out on these logs. And then this is the falls at high water. This is more like what you'll see if you go this time of year, maybe a little bit earlier in February, early March. Uh, so then there's Storyburn, which you can also access from the same summit trailhead. So to the right of this picture is where the Gales Creek Trail comes out, and then Storyburn, you would want to take this road up here, Storyburn Road. And the trailhead is sort of in the middle of the trail, so you can take one direction from the trailhead that is this way, and it links up with the Gravel Brothers Trail and Rogers Camp Trailhead in about 2 miles. And it's kind of narrow and perched along the ledge. Lots of Devil's Club here. A ton of old stumps from the original growth. Some of them you can still see the springboard notches from where they would cut the notch and then stand on it so they could get up above the uh the root butt of the tree to where it's actually practical to saw it down. Um, so yeah, there's also lots of little plants growing all along the trail to the side here if you want to keep your eyes peeled, because then you'll see things like this baneberry. uh, Very cool, very poisonous. Lots of interesting lichens all along the trees here. So even though it's somewhat close to the highway, the air is really clean here because a lot of these lichens wouldn't grow in a more polluted area. So that's a good indicator for us. There's also these really cool stumps where it's decomposed enough that most of the center has rotted away, but these branches you can still see going into the center and getting bigger as the tree aged, which I just thought was super cool. Pretty sure this is just a Doug fir stump. But yeah, lots of beautiful moss everywhere, of course. There's a ton of berries at this trailhead, all along the parking area. There's the thimbleberry and the dewberry or trailing blackberry. There's also choke cherries, uh, oso berries, just a lot of a lot of beautiful fruit picking at the right time of year. And this is the other side where it goes sort of back west and towards it hooks up with the Gales Creek Trail eventually. So this part you cross the gravel road and go down this direction. And you'll actually be able to pass another waterfall on this trail if you hike it far enough. And I don't have pictures of this. I couldn't get them in the right season, but there's a ton of bunchberry that grows along here. So then the next place is Smith Homestead. This place is further along down Highway 6, but you can see it pretty much right from the highway, right before you turn off. There's this clearing that the Smith family, I think they partially made, but it was partially here because of the river. And this is actually an Oregon white oak. So even past the crest of the Coast Range, there's a white oak. I don't know. I'm imagining they may have planted it, but it may have been there. It may have been something brought in maybe along the trail by the Kalapuya. I'm not sure. I'm really interested in what the history of this tree is. This is another giant cottonwood. There's a bunch of cottonwoods out there by this river bend. Here's a picture from the forest center of when the Smith family was homesteading it. So you can kind of stand in the clearing today and there's, pits or plants, and you can kind of imagine like, oh, this is where things were. There's leftover plants from the homestead, so you can find some little snowdrops in part of the field. And over by that big cottonwood, there's a maple, and up that maple grows hops. I'd love to go there in the right season because me and my husband homebrew, and we've always talked about getting to the hops when they're blooming and making like a homestead homebrew, and that would be fun. And there's tons of nettles all over there. I imagine there's, wherever they had their chicken coop or their compost pile, there's just these uh, big nettle patches that are still living off that nitrogen. The cottonwood also see a lot of use by beaver. There's just tons of beaver sign. They're working on cutting this one down. It's working on healing itself. It's kind of a back and forth, and they've succeeded in getting some of them pretty massive trees they're working on right now. So, yeah, those beaver are incredibly determined. I'm always really impressed with the size of trees they can take down. This is a view of the river from there. It's the Wilson looking west. Some salmon jaws. Some more toothwort and some, oh, it used to be Cynthris, but I think it's Veronica now, some snow queen. And sedges, little strawberries. There's all sorts of little wild strawberries in the field. And I don't remember the name of this guy, but they kind of grow over by the bridge that you don't cross when you first come in because the parking lot's just before the bridge, but they're all up around the base of the foot of the bridge. And there's a really cool, really old ant hill for these Thatcher ants. It's been there. We've been going here for more than 10 years and it's been there the whole time. So I can only imagine how old this thing is. And I spared you the video footage of the ants seething all over this mound. But if you look close, there's just tons of ants all over doing their little jobs, bringing all the little forest detritus to keep this hill built up. It's, you know, I don't even know how to describe how big it is. It's probably like the span of my arms across. It's just huge. And that's right by the path. So when you're going toward the meadow, it'll be on your left side when you're about halfway there. There's also some evergreen huckleberries and lots of beautiful osoberry, especially around the parking lot, the first part of the path before you hit the meadow. And this one you can see there's a day use shelter that's available for rent, and then this is out behind it, a view of the river in very high water. Lots of water moving through there. So I wasn't sure where to put this because the Wilson River Trail is long. So the first part of the Wilson River Trail is actually before the Smith homestead, but the last part is much after. So it just depends on where you want to hop on. It runs behind the forest center. They're working on extending it past Elk Creek into the Idiot Creek area, and it goes as far as Koenig Creek right now on the west end. But it's got a lot of little bridges, and it goes over all these tributaries to the Wilson. Uh, this is a section near the footbridge trailhead, and I've got 3 different pictures to kind of show you how much the water levels change over the year. So this is early February, I believe. And then this is late May. And then that is August. So this is a great swimming hole. There's lots of cool plants that grow on these cliffs. So we've got goat's beard is all over those cliffs. Lots of maidenhair fern. I think this is a saxifrage, I want to say. More of those beautiful snow queen. I really love them. They're also all over the rocks this time of year. I think this is a Sitka valerian, but really young. There's definitely valerian there. They just, they're much taller later in the year, and this time of year they look more like this. This is the titular footbridge that crosses from the highway side over onto this other side of the rock. And then you can see this, I think this is Bridge Creek Falls coming out here. And so this is more the west side of the river, whereas the other rocks were on the east. And so as you move from east to west, you can see these other plants like the lily, I think Columbia lily, or I just call it tiger lily. And there's all sorts of meadow rue, the male and the female. And you can also see tons of old logging artifacts like this cable here. It just kind of gets discarded and then washes down the river in high water and then stranded up on the rocks at low water. One of my favorite places that's a little harder to get to is Cedar Creek or Cedar Butte. And this is a very short trail, but a very steep trail. So you gain over 700 feet in less than a mile. You start around 2,200 feet and you get up to almost 3,000 feet at the summit. And it used to be the site of a fire lookout, and its initial one was just this crow's nest type here. And if you look real close, this isn't a branch, this is a guy on the trunk waving his hand. So that should give you an idea of the scale of these first sort of raw, primitive fire prevention tactics. So this gets pretty overgrown this time of year into May and June. This is the trailhead. So you enter through those little stiles right there, but the first portion is a lot of near bushwhacking. And then you pretty much go straight up. It's kind of hard to tell in these pictures the perspective, but the trail runs up here and just goes up and up and up. And there's all sorts of little guys along the way. There's yerba buena. There's I think a penstemon, and the paintbrush. And I think that's like a Nephalium or a Gamokita back there. Pearly everlasting relative. There's the bead lily or queen's cup. And there's these cool guys, the coptis or gold thread. Those guys are super cool. And they've got the ballistic seed pods. When it rains, the raindrops hit them and they launch the seeds far from the mother plant. There's some kind of biscuit root guy up there. I haven't keyed that one out to individual species. Um, Same with this guy. Lots of false lily of the valley and the windflower, the anemone. There's a little clump of those guys about halfway up. Those are really cool. And dead straw, bear grass when you get way up there, and yarrow. Oh, it might be a goldback fern. I'm not as familiar with that. Not sure. Yeah, lots of wild onion. This one's all over. Once you crest the peak and you kind of get to the view area, this is all around your feet and by the benches. And then my favorite of all, the copper bush. It blooms around the summer solstice on Cedar Butte, maybe a little bit before in warmer years, and it is just the coolest thing. I love this plant. Um, I'm hoping to lead a hike out there with the NPSO around that time of year, so I'm hoping we can get to see it in bloom. Uh, right now I have it scheduled for the solstice, but I might need to reschedule it, so just kind of stay tuned with your emails on that one. But they are just beautiful, and there's a good healthy stand of bushes out there, and when they're in full bloom, they're just amazing. And this is the view from the top. On a clear day, way out here, you can see the ocean. A little bit of a rainbow. And there's a bunch of Oregon sunshine all around your feet. More paintbrush, and then there's two little benches for you to chill out on. And since it's such a short trail, a lot of times we'll stay until just before sunset, and then we can kind of book it down the hill before the mountain lions come out. But it's such a beautiful view for sunset. It's totally worth walking back in the dark. And then probably the furthest west on the Highway 6 corridor, I wanted to include this one both because of its history for being the place where Tom McCall signed the forest into existence, the state forest designation, but also because this is one of the more accessible trails. The trails are fairly wide and they're also fairly flat. So if people have a little bit harder time hoofing it up a mountain like Cedar Butte, this is a really good option if you still want to see some beautiful plants like the bleeding heart, or later in the year the larkspur. There's a lot of these larkspur, and this is kind of what they look like right now before they get in bloom, but they get like over your head tall. And there are tons of these beautiful, all different kinds of mosses going on the branches, and lots of ferns. And we saw a 4-petaled trillium there, which I thought was very cool. This little mutant guy. So I had to include that here. Um, and yeah, elderberry and the Siberian miner's lettuce. Lots of cool shrubby forest plants at this time of year. Also, I think there's some more Nuttall's toothwort here and some more of the Snow Queen. It's just a really nice place and just a super short trail. And there's one part that's maybe a little bit steep for unassisted wheelchair access, but it's all wide enough, and most of it is flat enough for wheelchair access. Definitely walker type assisted access for sure. And so these are kind of plants that I didn't really have a trail associated with it. Maybe I was in the Tillamook forest, but I was, on Weyerhaeuser land, or not exactly on the designated state forest land itself, or maybe this is really close to the Tillamook forest, but just outside of the official boundaries, or it's somewhere, but not really on a trail, but more examples of the kind of plants you can see if you get out there, explore, find kind of your own places on other trails or off trail. Some columbine, more self-heal, beautiful dogwoods. Those are just starting to get going right now. There's a lot of those up in the Timber area. If you take Timber and then Cochrane Road, that's probably a good place to see it. They like it a little bit drier than some of the more wet hikes that I've been profiling. It's the Clutchie Creek spruce stump, but had to include that for just an example of how big the trees can get out here. Giant, giant cedar. These cool, this is an alder at the trail in the back of the rest stop on 26, and it's just this like hand. It has the most like hand-like trunk arrangement, and it just comes out over the water. It's a perfect place to like lay back and take a nap or read a book. It's such a cool tree. And then a little hazel. These guys are all over, so I didn't really know what trail to attach them to, but I just love their little pink flowers and they're super cute. Skunk cabbage everywhere, but what a massive, impressive swamp this one was. This is also closer to the timber area, Wildcat Mountain. There's a Pacific hound's tongue, little Pipsissewa, Prince's pine. These guys are really hard to find in the Coast Range, but there's just a couple places I know of that they kind of stick around, or they're there some years and then I can't find them other years. So this was kind of a special little find, and I had to capture the picture while they were there. And the next probably 2 or 3 years I didn't find them there. And then ghost pipe or fairy smoke, uh, Monotropa uniflora. These guys are really cool chlorophyll-less plants, and there's magical, and they pop up where they have good mycorrhizal partners to exchange with the trees. Other orchids, the Calypso orchid, got a different color form there in the inset, striped coral root, spotted coral root. There's lots of good orchids here because they love the like duffy, humusy layers of the older forests. Rattlesnake plantain, which is not a plantain but is an orchid. And then I've got one where it's in bloom. And I think this is a phantom orchid, and then I believe this is Twayblade. So this is teeny tiny. I'm really close in doing a macro shot on that one. But those are really cool. Those guys like a little bit shallower still. It's kind of like this is like a little bit east of the forest in the Vernonia area, and it's growing on top of like, the uh former seabed type part of the mountains, when with a really thin layer of mossy soil. And then wild ginger with their cool flowers on the ground so that the ants can find them. These guys and trilliums and bleeding hearts and some of the violets. These are all what are called myrmecocorous plants, which means they rely on the ants to come get the seeds and spread them. So they have these little like oil packets on every seeds called eleosomes, and they exude a scent that attracts the ants, and then they are food for them. And so they'll take them back to their little ant nests, and they'll strip the food packet off and then put the seed in their like ant garbage dump, which is a sweet place to bury a seed for these plants. So then they come sprout out of ant garbage dumps underground, which I think is super cool. And a kind of honorable mention here, I know I said it's the flora of the Tillamook hikes, but it's hard to talk about the Tillamook forest without talking about fungus. So we got some chanterelles and some hedgehog mushrooms, polypore, like turkey tail types, wood ear, little bird's nest fungus. These guys are so cute. All their little spores are like little eggs in the nest, little cups. Some puffballs. Those are a lot of fun. I think this is a Gomphidius. Not sure of the middle one, and then an Amanita. Maybe some kind of sulfur tuft for the middle guy. Another hedgehog. Another gorgeous chanterelle. There's also some white chanterelles in the like University Falls area, and some that are like a weird mottled mix of white and orange that I don't know if that's just a mutation or if they're a different subspecies I haven't seen described, but they're kind of fun and patchworky. Some chicken of the woods, more amanita, another polypore doing its fun dew thing, and some lichens. So we got the Usnea longissima, got the little, oh, sometimes they're called soldiers or fairy matchsticks, and I wasn't sure what this rust guy was. Again, I'm not a lichen expert, but it's just so beautiful. Had to include that guy. All right, so real quick, I'll go through navigating the forest. It can be a little bit of a challenge because so much of the hikes and ways to access the forest are logging roads. Especially the Highway 6, even the highway is just really rough right now. There's all these ongoing landslides underneath the roadbed that are making it incredibly rough. Uh, especially when it's narrow, there's very few passing lanes, it's really curvy, it's really steep, there's sharp drop-offs. A lot of the logging roads themselves have no guardrails. So just, you know, kind of use caution when driving on it. People can get really impatient, so don't let them push you around if you're not comfortable speeding. I know some people go 10, 15 miles over the speed limit, but we've also known people who have run their cars off the roads and not had good experiences. We know a few people who have had fatalities out there. So really be careful on the highway, really be careful on these logging roads because there's very little protection. Because they're so narrow, you really want to use turnouts and pullouts. Let other people pass you, especially if you are going to be on the inside. It's a lot easier for you to pull off into the turnout than for the person on the outside where the hill drops off. So just try and keep that in mind. Another thing is that since you're traveling up and down these super steep hills, your brakes can get really hot and then they can get kind of spongy and not work. So taking those chances when you see a pullout, just let things cool down. If you want to, you can drop it into a lower gear. It's just, do you want the wear on your transmission or your brakes? So be aware of how much you're using those when going downhill, because we have had instances where they get real soft and then they don't work very well. There's also lots of logging gates. Uh, they will close more gates during fire season, so really kind of pay attention. There's some where they close them at the end of the day because they are doing logging operations out there. So if you do drive out there and you notice you pass a gate, make sure that that's a gate that stay open. If you don't want to risk it, make sure you're out of there before 4 or 5 p.m. that day so that you don't get stuck behind a gate. We've had some friends get stuck behind a gate and well, let's just say they maybe had to resort to some light vandalism to get themselves out of there. Thankfully, they had a Sawzall, but maybe that's not something I want to suggest. So don't get stuck behind a gate. If you are going in active logging areas, use extreme caution. These are big vehicles lifting heavy logs, so sometimes it's better to just plan your trips for evening and weekends, that they aren't actually actively doing operations. And sometimes they just close parts of the forest because of the type of logging operation happening. There's also other users out there, so it's all really common to hear gunshots. There are designated ranges out there, and there are also just quarries where people go to shoot. Um, one of the people we know at the ODF has talked to people who were on opposite sides of a drainage shooting away from the quarry towards each other. And he talked to both of them and they were like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. So he couldn't really reprimand them. They weren't like shooting over a trail or anything illegal. But yeah, there's some, you know, some uncautious people out there, so you need to be the cautious one. Most of the time, Wolf Creek, University Falls, those are areas where you'll hear gunshots, but they're at designated ranges, so you don't have to worry as much. Just, if it's hunting season, wear bright clothing, carry a whistle, be mindful if you're taking dogs or horses out there. There are a lot of designated horse trails, but they can spook when gunshots are happening, so kind of use that information to plan when you want to time your visit. There's a lot of OHV users on Highway 6 corridor, so if you don't love the sound of a two-stroke engine, maybe you want to go out by 26 instead, or go in seasons. It's harder to go in seasons where you could avoid them because summer is nice for some purposes, and then the winter season is mudding season. So you can avoid them, but you can't really avoid the sounds. Yeah, horseback riders. It's just nice to stay chill and calm around the horse and let them pass so you don't spook them. And uh, kind of similar for mountain bike riders. They're supposed to cede the right of way to hikers, but because they can be going so fast and downhill, it can be easy for you to just step off the trail and let them pass. Especially around the Story Burn area, those are really heavily used mountain bike trails and they're shared, so just beware. Another thing, if you don't necessarily want to do a lot of foot hiking or you want to go where you can drive and then get off trail on foot, there are self-guided tours from the ODF in those high value conservation areas. So they have PDF maps of each of the district HVCA like habitat anchors, and then the PDF will also have directions on driving and uh, just self-guided tour information. And these areas are really cool because they're some of the places that they decided were important habitats. So you can see really cool things like down here I have the frigid shooting star. They they designed this district in the Miami watershed to be part of what surrounds one of the populations of the shooting star. So this is the Astoria district map for an example. So, here's 26 and then Highway 103, and then this is sort of how you access this habitat anchor. And, definitely spend some time familiarizing yourself with the map because these roads can be really labyrinthine, but it is a really cool area out there. These are all like forests that have the possibility to become old growth or late successional stands in the next 30 to 50 years. So they're very layered and diverse parts of the forest. And yeah, here's a picture of the shooting star. This is the only one that's not my picture. So this is from Wilbur Bloom of the Oregon Flora Project. But I just wanted to give an example of the kind of special plants that are in these areas. There's also travel management areas, especially around hunting season. And so you can go on the ODFW website and get the travel management area map. And that way you can access not just the forest, but also the private landowners that are cooperating for forest access. Yeah, so the map is these links are the ones that lead to, so the Astoria map will be on this link and I can copy paste those, or yeah, Kieran is doing it. But they're all on ODF's Oregon.gov website under forest benefits. They have a whole section, or you can just Google high value conservation area Oregon and they come right up. But yeah, so with the travel management areas, the maps look like this, and they have a north portion and a south portion. They show you the Tillamook forest, and then they also show you other private lands, so you always know whose land you're on and how not to trespass on private land. And you can, this is PDF, so you can download this from the this website right here. Just look for the one called North Coast Travel Management Area, and yeah, it's split into 2 different PDFs for North and South, and then you can read them on things like Avenza maps. Uh, so you just go in, you click the North or the South portion, and then it's geotagged, so it can show you where you are. You can click these things down here to have it show you like compass bearing, or you can set waypoints or have it leave like a breadcrumb trail to track where you've been. There's all sorts of different features on Avenza, and you get, I think, 3 maps for free. So if you don't want to pay, there's a couple different pay tiers for like professional and regular user, but you can also just use it for free. I've never paid for it. Other considerations just to make your trip easier right now is the very beginning of recreation season, so a lot of things will have blown down trees or overgrown paths. Lots of growth happens really fast, and they don't always stay on top of the maintenance, so just, you know, be aware that you might have to scramble over or under something that blew down in the winter or early spring storms. The weather can change really quickly because the Coast Range is the barrier between the ocean and the Willamette Valley, so it can be sunny over here and rainy over there. It can be the opposite. Maybe it's rainy over here, but you go to the Coast Range and then all of a sudden it's super sunny and you're up high enough that you're out of the clouds. Sometimes that can trick you and you're like, "Oh, it's such a nice day." And then you cross a bunch of streams while you're out there, and the streams get really high and it's hard to cross back and get back to your car. So if it's rained recently, if it starts raining on you, try and avoid stream crossings because you can get stuck. Same with snow. If you go up there, high enough up there right now, there's still snow on almost all the logging roads. So you can only get so far. Like right now, I probably couldn't get up to Cedar Butte just because there's so much snow until, sometimes well into June. You can bring your dogs in the forest, but please make sure they are on a leash. Please pick up after them. Uh, just safety things, carry a map, like a paper map, because there's almost no signal in a lot of these places. You can use Avenza maps offline, which is really nice. But if your phone runs out of battery, then you're kind of at a loss. So sometimes printing out a paper map can be nice. And the ODF website does have different paper maps as well. Same cautionary stuff as every hike. Tell someone where you're going, carry the 10 essentials. As far as dogs go, my PSA is please don't do this. Please don't be this person. This happens all the time out there, unfortunately, and we're always picking up these bags. And I'm almost of the opinion that, like, if you pick up the bag, don't bother putting the poop in the bag. The poop will melt in the rain. The bag never does. It's much more of an eyesore for me to see this plastic litter that's going to go right into the river drainage than it would be to see poop that eventually just becomes free nitrogen for these plants. So, just I don't think I'll have to actually tell anybody in this webinar, but someone out there is doing this. Please don't be that person. Don't be this person. Humans have this horrible habit of leaving their waste out there too, and I don't understand it. This one we saw on the path to this bathroom. It was maybe, 3 minutes to this bathroom. I don't get it. We are predators. We need to bury our waste. Need to, rediscover our instincts here because toilet paper, human waste, just up out on the surface. Nobody wants to see that. Nobody wants to accidentally step in it. So, like I said, you probably don't need this BSA, but I'd just like to remind everybody, don't be this person. Don't throw your trash all around. It's not good for the animals either. The bears will smell the food on the food residue on the trash. They'll eat it. It's not good for them. So if you see this and you didn't do it, please help me and pick it up. And just, yeah, don't be part of that problem. These are some more links for different forest resources. So the Tillamook State Forest has a blog that tells you which campgrounds are open, what like roads or campgrounds are getting worked on. There's trail closures, there's road closures. There's the planning your visit link for the Tillamook Forest Center, and Oregon Wild has their outdoor resources list. If you don't know what those 10 essentials are, that's a handy link to go figure out, oh, what should I bring? And yeah, Karen put the links in the chat. Thank you. And finally, what's happening in the forest? How can you get involved in things out in the Tillamook and the Clatsop? So the kind of hub of the Tillamook Forest is the Tillamook Forest Center. It's yeah, like not quite halfway down Highway 6, and it's near Jones Creek Campground and the Smith Homestead area that I talked about. It has an award-winning interpretive exhibit that's really cool that walks you through the ecology of the forest, native history in the forest, pioneer history in the forest, logging history, reforestation, all sorts of animals. They do salmon fry walks where they release salmon into the river, usually around this time of year. Um, they have rotating exhibits. So this year, their exhibit is called Roots. They don't have much information on it yet, but uh, I believe it's sort of like a double entendre on like roots, as in the tree nutrient system, and also our roots as people in the forest. Right now they're open until 4, but I think in May they switched to summer hours and they're open to 5, and it's mostly the weekend or the end of the weekend. And they have the school tower that you can climb up in if you've always wanted to be in a lookout tower. And so that's a kind of abstracted map of where it is within the forest. I volunteer for the Salmonberry Trail. You can too. It's an 82-mile non-motorized rail-to-trail project. It goes from here in Banks all the way out through Wheeler and Tillamook. We're just now starting to work on constructing the first, what we call the learning mile. So it's not open to the public yet, but you can come on guided hikes or on work parties if you want to get a sneak peek about what's going on as the railroad becomes a hiking, biking, horseback riding trail. We just finished up a bunch of volunteer work for tree planting and reforestation around the part where we've removed the rails. We don't currently have dates set, but we're about to get those out. So just, keep checking the website. We like to have like a monthly get together that we've had a couple so far this year. We still have the date TBA for April, but somewhere in the Portland metro area, we try to have a get together for everybody who's interested in the Salmonberry. And then, yeah, hikes, different volunteer work parties, all sorts of stuff. And you can just check the website, and then you can also sign up for emails there so you get notified. And this is sort of a rough idea of the trail. So it kind of, right now, we're working on this portion, and then it crosses into the Coast Range and goes along the Salmonberry Canyon, which is one of like the last roadless river areas. There's only the rail line here, and that's been washed out since 2007. So that's a very remote, wild area. And then down Wheeler, and then we kind of share the right of way with the Oregon Coast Scenic Railroad and the rail bike people right now. So you'll be able to bike or hike part of the line in the future. There's also trail parties going on with the Trail Keepers of Oregon. They're working to extend the Wilson River Trail east, like I was saying. They did a bunch of work last summer, and they're doing one just coming up this weekend. There might be, I think there was 3 more spots when I checked. So if you want to sign up for a last minute thing, that's the only one they have dates set for, but it's something that comes out on a rolling basis. So if you just keep checking their website or their Eventbrite, you can get out there and work on a portion of the Wilson River Trail and sign up for a trail party. And then these are things that are coming up with NPSO. So the hikes I'm going to be doing, I'm doing one for Cedar Butte, and I'm going to try to do that in late June. Right now I have it set for the 21st, but like I said, I might need to change it. It's also my parents' 50th anniversary, so depending on what they want to do, I might need to move that date. And then I think it's just 2 weeks later. I think it's the first or second weekend in July. I want to go out to Soapstone Lake. I'm hoping that that will be the right time of year for the sundew. And yeah, I'm pretty sure I have that set for July 6th, but again, not 100% certain. So just keep checking your email. And then the other hikes that are happening in May, Kieran's doing one at Saddle Mountain, and then Linda's doing one at Saddle Mountain in June. So depending on what part of the bloom you want to go see, you can go out there. I didn't have any pictures of Saddle Mountain in my trip because I hadn't been out there recently. It's been closed for a number of years and they just finally reopened it. So that's kind of exciting. And then August, Kieran's doing one on Kings Mountain, which is a more challenging trail, kind of like Cedar Butte, but longer. They have signs at the trailhead for that that's like, bring water. It is a 1 liter minimum trip. So uh, don't overestimate your abilities, but it is a very cool hike. And if you're going at a botanical pace, it's a little bit better than going with your peak bagging super fit friends. So yeah, hopefully you guys can come on one of those with one of us or get out there on your own using some of the information I shared. So yeah, thanks for uh, having me on and listening to me and letting me go a little bit over. So that's the end of my talk.
Thank you, Kira. Do you still have some time to answer questions?
Oh yeah, lots of time.
Okay, excellent. The first question, Dawn asked about the reseeding, the reforesting effort after the Tillamook burn. Do you know whether that was a monoculture, just like planting Doug fir, or?
Yeah, so there may have been some non-Doug fir, but the majority of the species that were planted were Doug fir. And actually, it was kind of a problem because in their sort of mad dash to reforest it as fast as they could, they actually ended up getting a bunch of seedlings and seeds of the Rocky Mountain subspecies of Douglas fir. So they were not subspecies that were adapted to the Coast Range weather at all. So a lot of these trees that were from the first round of reforestation have been highly susceptible to fungus and fungal rots, highly susceptible to bark beetles. So that's sort of been part of the Department of Forestry's like management plan is like successively thinning and taking out these stands that were from those first initial waves of reforestation because they're just not not adapted to this environment, and it does show as they age and become even more susceptible to disease.
Wow. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah,
Willow wondered which river or creek flows through the Fishhawk Falls area. Do you
that
know the
is
name?
Fishhawk Creek, and
Fishhawk
it
Creek, go
flows
figure.
into the Nehalem.
Gotcha. Had a couple of plant ID questions. I think this was on slide 42 at Soapstone Lake. There was a flower with 5 petals in the middle, and Erica was wondering if you could ID that for us again.
Yeah, should I bring it back up or
That might be
just,
helpful. Yeah,
okay.
I think you gave us a genus, but I don't remember what it was.
Let's see. Slide 42.
Yep.
Oh, this guy?
Yeah, that,
I'm
that one.
pretty sure that's, I want to say slender boykinia. Is that what it's called?
Oh, okay, Boykinia.
I,
That makes sense. It does look like it's in the saxifrage family to me. So,
yeah. I know I wanted one that I could get the leaves and the flowers, but it was just so hard because their stems are so long that time of year. So
mhm,
that's my entry for, ooh, you can't see it. So I'm pretty sure
gotcha.
that's the same guy, Mr. Boykinia there. So yeah, Boykinia
Great,
occidentalis or Boykinia elata, coast or slender Boykinia in the saxifrage.
great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Carolyn had Caroline had a skin question about um I think something she thought was a goldback fern, but I think was actually a lomatian Martin, one of the Coast Range lomations on Cedar Butte that you
Yeah,
mentioned.
yeah. I
I think that was
hadn't
like 92.
there was definitely,
Yeah,
yeah, some of the
92 there, the one on the left.
lomations. Um, maybe that's not the best picture of them, but there were some with larger blooms where you could really tell
Hmm.
that it was um this guy. Let me see. Does that get bigger?
Yeah, I think that's Lomatian martindaley, or
Okay,
Coast
yeah,
Range,
yeah.
sometimes called Cascade Lomatian. You can find it out in the gorge in the Cascades, not just in the Coast Range, but
Yeah, well
it's
that's what I thought. It was like, oh, this looks more like ones that I've seen in the Cascades.
uh-huh.
But that would make sense if you can
Yeah,
find it both places.
I think it's the only one you can find in the Coast Range, although I've heard rumors that there's one that looks very much like it that grows in partly shaded riparian environments that is an undescribed species that team is working
Ooh,
on. So
oh, that's
stay
cool.
tuned on that one. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
but that was on a mountain, right? So probably just Coast
Yep.
Range
Yeah,
Formation. Okay.
that's like almost at the very top. I mean, you can kind of see it's like it's so like rocky around
Okay.
here. So that's where like you start coming out of the lower tree parts and start getting on those like exposed balds and bluffs.
Hmm. Let's see, got some questions about navigation that we answered with the links you shared. Um, yeah. Well, I think we're going to open it up to live questions. If anyone has live questions, just hang on a second and let me allow people to unmute and start their video. If anyone wants to stick around and chat, you are welcome to. Um, it's a great time to get to hang out virtually since we don't often have in-person events anymore. Um, um, yeah, so folks should be able to unmute themselves, turn on their cameras. If anyone has questions, now's a good time for Kira. And Alan, did you have a question?
No,
Oh no, just saying hi.
yeah,
Okay. Um, cool. Well, not seeing questions from anyone else. So if folks want to turn their cameras on and just say hello, especially like to hear from folks who are new to the chapter, new to the Portland chapter, new to NPSO in general. Hi, Dave.
I have a question.
no,
Yeah,
I saw that you were saying in the chat that something was probably planted because it was well outside its range. Was that the oak that you were talking about,
that was the oak tree. Yeah,
Kieran?
I'm kind of a Oregon white oak nut, and am
Yeah,
aware
cool.
that oak tree has been posted on iNaturalist before. It's like several dozen miles from the next nearest Oregon white oak tree, which is in the Tualatin Valley, and that's the only um, it's just that one lone oak tree. So my best guess is it was planted. I'm not sure by who or when.
Hmm.
Yeah. but it's
I did
possible it
have a
wasn't.
question about the Salmonberry Trail. That work that you do you bring your own
Mhm.
tools or are the tools provided? Are work tools for the trail repair provided or do you bring them
It was
with you?
cutting out a little bit for me.
Alan asked if the tools were provided or if you needed to bring your own tools
Oh,
for the
okay.
volunteer work with the Salmonberry Trail.
Yeah. So it's kind of a combination of both. We bring our own gloves and things like that. And then a lot of times one of the leaders will bring, depending on what the work has been, it's been rakes, or sometimes someone will bring loppers. A lot of times there's a call for people to bring extra tools if they have them. So if you have loppers or nippers, or if we have permission, it depends on the volunteer liability. So sometimes we're able to do power tool work, and they always call for like, hey, if you have string trimmers or small chainsaws and can work with them well, feel free to bring them. So it's a little
Thank
bit
you.
of both. Yeah.
Dave or Michelle, did you all have questions or just want to say hello?
Um, I just wanted to say hi. Yeah, I'm not.
Great.
I.
How long have you been a member of NPSO, Dave?
Let me see. I have been a member since 1981.
Wow. Okay. So I think what NPSO was like, Willow, help me out here. Not even 10 years old yet at that point.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And I belong to the Emerald chapter of New
Mhm.
Eugene, and I've been the president a few years, and vice president and treasurer, and the whole.
Great. Well, thank you for your service.
Oh yeah, I would like to go on a. I've never been to Saddle Mountain, so you have a trips up there in May and June.
Yes, yeah. We have a couple trips because there's different things blooming different times of the year. Um, Here, I will post my email address in the chat. And if you want to send me an email, I'll send you a link to our chapter calendar. Does that work okay for you?
Yeah, I can. I can. I have access to uh, the bulletin. I'll just look in there. I guess it
Okay.
should be in there.
It
Yeah.
it might not be in the bulletin. I just can't remember if it made it in there. So if you don't find it in there, just feel free to write me an email.
Oh, okay. Sure. Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'll say goodbye then, and thank
Right.
you.
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
Do we have anyone who's new to the chapters who's still on who wants to say hello? See a bunch of familiar names still. So Kira, I had a question about Wildcat Mountain you mentioned near
Oh,
Timber.
yeah.
Which road was it that you said you used to get up there?
So I like to go the shorter way, which
Okay.
is if you go up Hayward Road, which is off of Highway 26,
Uh-huh.
like near Manning. Uh,
Uh-huh.
like if the Manning trailhead of the Banks Verona Trail is on your right, Hayward Road goes off to the left and up the hill. And then like right before you reach the summit of Hayward Road, there is a like short logging road that goes off and ends at a gate, and that is Stimson's Road that goes up to Wildcat Mountain. And I think that's either just over or just under 3 miles. Whereas if you go the other way from, I think, Timber Road, it's like an 8-mile walk to get up to Wildcat, but you're in the Tillamook Forest the whole time, which is, I think, what we put in the book.
Okay.
Because then you're in the Tillamook Forest the whole time and you
Yeah.
don't have to deal with Stimson access rules. But I believe that portion of Stimson is under their recreational access allowed lands
Okay.
and not under their like private no access lands. So as long as you don't block the gate, you can park near there and just make sure that like something as big as a log truck could get past you and open the gate, or go during, I mean, even if you go during off hours, it's probably still a good idea not to block the gate. We've definitely been fined picking elderberries parking in front of the gate before, even on a weekend. So oopsie. But yeah, like you go up that road, and then at a certain point you will that road will start to curve extremely to the right, and instead of taking that road, you look in the forest to your left for an old roadbed which was Wildcat Mountain Road, and then you take that old roadbed up, and then it will dump you out on the road that goes up onto the top of the mountain itself, right above the quarry. So you can hike up. It's pretty steep, that last portion, but it's like clear and rocked and everything. And you can hike up there. And when you get out there, you can see like all of the Willamette Valley. It's the point of greatest prominence for Washington County. So it's like the highest thing around, and you can see all these Cascade Peaks, and it's a really cool. One of my slides has the view from Round Top, which is just behind Wildcat Mountain. And yeah, we like to hike up there on July 4th, and we'll hike up there in the evening, and then we just kind of sit above the quarry, and then we can watch everybody's 4th of July show like all along the Willamette Valley. So that's fun.
I have another like coast range question for you. Have you ever heard of a Blue Lake Lookout off of the Storyburn Road?
Oh, off of Storyburn Road.
Yeah, where it's like near in that area.
Well, I know of a Blue Lake in that area, but I
Hmm.
don't know specifically of the lookout.
Okay, it's not there anymore. I was just
Yeah.
curious if you might know anything about it. Uh,
Do you know that
I,
I can't remember the guy's name, but there's a guy that keeps a website of all the like former lookout
yes,
locations. Okay, yeah.
that's how I was able to find the location, was that guy. There's that guy's fire lookout's website, because
Yeah.
otherwise there's like no trace of it anywhere
Yeah.
I could find.
And I mean, that kind of is how it is with a lot of those on the ground in the Coast Range too, just
Yeah.
between how many harvests have happened and how many fires have happened. Even after like all the Tillamook burn fires, we had a big fire on Cedar Butte, I think 2020, 2021. So like there's a lot of things that just get, you know, covered over or destroyed with time. So a lot of those things, especially if they looked like that crow's nest that was on Cedar Butte,
Hmm.
there's no like cement anchors, there's no like radio towers, there's no infrastructure that would be left from some of those earlier things. Some of them were just cabins on the ground, and when they were done with them, there's some where and he'll say that on his website too, I'm sure you've seen, where it's like this lasted 6 years, this lasted 4 years,
Yeah.
1934 to 1938 is all you get. And so
Yep.
a lot of times they would break down those cabins because like they were kind of like pre-built to be able to be packed on like a mule or a horseback, and so all of the boards were like certain standard lengths, and so they would just break them down and then move them to the next place they were going to use them, and then reseed the site or just let it grow from natural reseeding, and you could barely tell anything was there.
Wow, that's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
But yeah, it is a plan of mine because we have hiked up to the former locations of a few different lookouts, including Cedar Butte, and
mhm.
eventually I would like to go to all of the rest of them and see what, if anything, is there. Because at Cedar Butte, there's nothing really on the top, but if you are just down, like the logging road that you get off of to go to the trailhead for Cedar Butte continues around the like eastern, like southeastern side of the butte, and there's like a wide place that you can park, and if you then cross the road and go towards the butte, there used to be, I don't know if it's still there after the fire, but there used to be the old skids and metal tank for an old steam donkey, and when they were done they just like left it in the woods, and so it's still there, and it still had like the like old spark arrestor net and everything, which usually gets like blown off and rusted away so fast. So that one is like a kind of cool little secret thing for people to find if they know where to bushwhack.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah, I just saw some like concrete pylons, nothing special, uh,
Oh,
when
okay.
I was
So,
there,
yeah.
but, yeah, I find like sometimes, uh, in herbarium vouchers, there are sometimes herbarium vouchers from specific lookout sites.
Really.
I guess those were places people knew to go or just decided to go looking, and
Yeah.
so on
Well,
Oregon Flora, you can sometimes find some interesting plants at those former lookout sites.
yeah, there's a couple people, just like former fire lookout like journals that I've read where like they were kind of like small time botanists too, because they're out there for a whole summer
Mhm.
and there's a whole lot of not fire time where
Yeah.
you're just like, what do I do? And so that's, yeah, how probably a lot of those vouchers got theirs. They're just like poking around their little peak that they have to stay on and naming every little plant they can find.
Mhm. Great. Well, I think I'll wrap us up here. Oh, actually, Erica has another question.
Oh,
Do any of these trails require the Northwest Forest Pass?
no. None of the
So
ones that I added need that. So I don't think like I
that's
think
federal
Northwest
land.
Forest is, yeah, just federal
Yeah,
land, and this is all state land that I've mentioned. There are some parts in the very furthest south part of the Tillamook Forest that kind of interlock with the Siuslaw. Um, and so some of those you might want to like double check. Like there's like the Niagara Falls Trail off the Nestucca River. I could do a whole other presentation just on the Nestucca River corridor. That place is also amazing. But yeah, most of that is technically the Siuslaw and not the Tillamook Forest at that point.
gotcha. Yeah, and I mean, unless you're, um, I think there are some private timberlands where they uh ask you to like register somehow. That's mainly
Yeah,
if you're a
so
hunter
the
though.
Weyerhaeuser lands,
Yeah,
they have a combination of you can get a pass, and some of
right.
their lands are like recreation pass access, but some are lease only. So if you are not the person who won that lease, like nobody else can come on it. And then some are
Uh,
just closed entirely. There's a whole section in this northwest corner of Oregon that used to be Longview timberlands, mostly Columbia County, but a couple in Clatsop and northern Washington County too. And those all have blue gates. And so we used to have what we called the blue gate rule, which was that Longview just let you recreate wherever on their land. And it was sort of a dawn till dusk, no disruptive access thing. But they sold out their lands to Weyerhaeuser in like 2015 or 2016. And so then for the first couple years, Weyerhaeuser kind of didn't change anything. And then they started slowly introducing recreational access passes. And then they started shutting down more with like recreational leases. So, like up by Wildcat, there's a huge section of Weyerhaeuser that I used to love to bring people to. And it's like so beautiful. And there's like a confluence of two creeks. And there's like that picture of all the skunk cabbage is from
mhm.
around there, and there's like this huge meadow with all these self-heal and other wildflowers, and like this one section of road where the ocean spray just like hangs over and is like full of blooms, and there's like spotted owl or barred owls like all running around in there, and different like fun little creatures. But yeah, you can't get in there anymore, so oh well, too bad.
Yeah. that is too bad. I think back in the like long enough ago, there weren't gates at all until companies. It was like what there was like a car crash,
Yeah.
and then they sued, like the family
Yeah.
sued the timber company, and they started throwing up gates all over the state after they got concerned about liability. Does that ring a bell? Is that right?
Totally. Yeah. I can't remember the exact case, but yeah, it was like either an injury or a fatality. And
Hmm.
then it was like, yeah, then it just became a liability thing because it was on their land and
Right.
they didn't make it safe enough or whatever. And so, uh, yeah. And also, there was like a lot of problems with dumping going on
Oh,
at the same time. So, like in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of people who would just drive out any old road and dump things. Like if you do go up Wildcat from the Stimson side, about halfway up the old section of abandoned roadbed, you can look down the hill and it's just this like huge dump, and you can see, like old like tab top cans, so you can kind of like date this garbage midden. Um, but there's just tons of stuff like that where people would just drive out there and destroy stuff, and all the timber companies just they didn't want that kind of liability either because people are, putting TVs out there and shooting them up, and then there's, glass and other stuff that you have to worry about, and it's just too much to deal with for them, and it's their land, so they can just shut it down, and that's easier for them.
yep. Yeah. Well, it's too bad that we can't. It's not
I know,
possible to
that's
go
my
to some
dream.
of those places anymore.
I've heard so many stories from like old hunters and fishermen of like, oh yeah, me and my dad, we used to drive out here in the 60s and like we'd just put our tent up on the side of the river, and I'm just
Yeah.
like, oh, if only.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think we'll close here. Thank you very much again for
Oh yeah, thanks
sharing
so
your
much for
presentation with
having
us.
me.
Yeah. And thanks everyone who's still on for joining us this evening.
Thanks, yeah.